So here is our square and a square unit, and this is pieced from one fabric A, or your focal fabric square, and then 2 squares of your background fabric that we slice in half to create triangles. So let me show you how to make this step by step. I'm going to take my 2 background squares and line up my ruler so it's on the diagonal and slice right across. And that's going to produce 2 of my triangles, and then I slice across the other one, and that'll create the other 2. And don't be intimidated by the idea of using triangles. It's really not scary. They're very easy to work with, so long as you know how they're going to stretch. So this piece of fabric was cut on grain, meaning that the grain line of the fabric is running with the edges of that piece. Of course, we just cut this in half on the bias. So do understand that this is going to be stretchier than this. And this is why it's really important always before you cut your fabric, make sure that you've starched and pressed it, and that is going to ensure it's not going to stretch and wiggle out of shape. Okay, now I'm going to fold this in half and give it a little crease along that longest edge. I always cut out my triangles slightly bigger than I need, so that way at the end we can trim this square and a square unit up to be exactly the right size for our quilt block. Okay, now I've finger pressed that also in half, and what I'm going to do is just nest those folds together so that the midpoint of that triangle is lining up with the midpoint of that center square. I'm going to place a pin right there. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Fold it in half, give it a little crease, do the same thing with the triangle, give it a little crease, and if you are using fabric that has a right and wrong side, just pay attention to that, so that way you have those crease marks and they just nest really nicely, just like that. And then place a pin there. Okay, so that is ready to go. We're going to take this to our sewing machine and stitch along these lines with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm here at my machine and I've just set to the 1 stitch, which is the center straight stitch, and then I've lowered my stitch length down to 1.5 millimeters, and that's just going to produce a nice tight stitch that will allow me to press my seam allowances open. Okay, I'm just making sure that that triangle is nicely lined up with that square, and I'm just going to piece with a 1/4 inch patchwork foot. When I get right up to that pen, I just take it out and keep on stitching. And I really think it's a good thing to keep the background fabric, the triangle that you have cut on the bias, so whatever that is, whether you're doing one this way or you're doing it the other way, always make sure that the triangle is on the top. And here you can see I am piecing with contrasting thread just so you can see it. But I think that's going to minimize stretch by keeping the triangle on top, so that way it's not rubbing up against your feed dogs, which can kind of stretch a little bit against your fabric. Okay, I'm going to rotate things around and just stitch on down. There we go. Take out another pen. And as you can see, these are pretty quick to piece, and if you have a lot to make, like we're going to be making 16 of these for block 4, well, you can just chain piece through one side and then chain piece through the other side, so it'll go really quickly. So now I'm finger pressing that seam open carefully. Again, that triangle shape is on the bias, so be really gentle and try not to stretch that as you finger press that seam open. And finger pressing, this is why I don't take my iron to it and try and dig that seam open with the tip of my iron. That really doesn't work, and it always ends up distorting your fabric. So just take your time, get that seam nice and open, and give it a good press with a hot, dry iron. There we go. So now let's trim this down. And what I'm going to do is just basically focus on lining up the thin lines on the ruler with the straight seam line right across that unit. That looks good. I'm just going to cut right along that side. I don't want to trim any fabric away from the square. I just want to trim the tails off of those triangles. So just be really careful about your ruler placement and make sure that you're not lopping off a little bit of that center square. If anything, leave a little bit of the black triangle extending if you have to, because you don't really want to lose anything off of the square. Okay, that looks great. Now we're going to do that exact same step again. Take the entire thing, fold it in half. Now you can match up a seam line there. Just fold that in half, give it a nice little crease. Same thing for the other side. And this is the method I always use for squareness square units because it just ensures that they're nice and square. It's really even, and I like it because it's efficient. You can sew two sides and then you get to the other sides. So there we go. I creased that. Now place that. Now this time I didn't crease that. I creased that way, and I really want to crease it this way so that way those crease lines nest. There we go. Now that's working. Just line that up nicely and place a pin. Okay, and again, fold in half, give it a little crease. Do the same thing with your triangle. And it really does help to have that little crease mark. I know that might seem like a little silly step, but that lets you know where the midpoint is. You know, this is a unit where you don't want to start the triangle way down there. If you do, you're going to end up losing a lot of fabric and it won't be the right size. There we go, that's pinned in place. Now I'm going to return to my machine and stitch this the exact same way I did before, just stitching straight down both sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here you can see I've stitched those seams and pressed them open. And now the last step is to trim the squareness square up properly so it's the correct size. And this is a very important step and it's a little tricky. So I'm going to really explain this in detail. The first step is to center up the finished size of the unit over the unit that you've stitched. And you can see I have designed this so this is about 1/8 of an inch bigger than it needs to be on all sides. What I want to do is line up a straight line through the middle, and I also want to line up and have 1/4 inch marks lined up with those points. Now if your piecing is off, just try and center up those 1/4 inch marks as close as they can be, even if that means that you're going to lop off your points ever so slightly. That's okay. So here you can see I've got a 1/4 inch mark and a 1/4 inch mark. That looks good. I'm going to press firmly and trim right across. And this is really the only thing that you know is straight in this unit is that corner to corner. And so this is really the best way to line this up and be able to trim it. Now I'm going to rotate it all the way around. Unlike half square triangles, 1/4 square triangles that we go kind of in a circle, we're going to go two sides first and then the other two sides next. So here we go. Now I'm going to line up, rotate this around so I can see my cut really well. I'm going to again line up a straight line through the middle, make sure I have 1/4 inch marks on those two corners, and I'm lining up the cut size of my square and a square here on this side. So I want to do all of those things at once, very carefully. And then that looks good. Press firmly and make that cut. Okay, so we have two sides that are trimmed now. Now we have two more sides to go. So again, I'm going to line up, nice straight line through the center of the unit, looking at those 1/4 inch marks on both sides, and then I'm also lining up a straight line here on the bottom and a straight line here on the top. And you might only have like little dash lines or something on your ruler to line that up. That's okay. Just do the best you can so that you know the top and bottom are straight, the center is straight, and you've got that unit nicely centered in the middle. That looks great. Trim it down. And this also allows you, even if your piecing isn't 100% perfect on those triangles, it's okay. Now at this point, you can kind of give yourself a little breather because at this point, you're just squaring down the unit to the proper size. So in this case, you can see I've lined up with a straight line, top and bottom, and then this is the finished cut size of my unit. I've lined that up on the back side, and now I can make my final cut. So yeah, it is a little bit persnickety on the cutting, but that is the key because whenever you go to piece these units together, you want to try not to lop off those corner points. And this cutting, trimming them down, is the key to that. So with careful piecing and with careful trimming, you're going to have perfect square in a square units every time.